All political systems are based on intrigue, right? Like whether it's at a government or a corporation or a university, there's always intriguing going on. Yeah, Byzantium has been characterized by that, sort of stigmatized by that in modern scholarship as a den of vicious fighting by eunuchs and women behind the throne. So the question is the emperor managing to hold it together, in which case they tamp that down? If he's not, then he's in trouble. Most people know about the fall of the Roman Empire, and that's a kind of misnomer. It's only the western half of the Roman Empire that fell, like in the 5th century. The eastern half continued on for another 1,000 years, and that's what we're talking about here. So in the 11th century, the East Roman Empire, or what we call Byzantium, is the oldest state in existence by far, at least in the part of the world that the East Romans were aware of. In its imperial form, 1,000 years old. The East Roman Empire just at some point becomes the only Roman Empire around, and this is how it saw itself. So it continues on down to 1453 when Constantinople is conquered by the Ottoman Turks. Compared to other empires in world history, it extended its citizenship to its subjects. So suddenly, the emperors are all from the provinces, the military leadership is all from the provinces, the armies are recruited in the provinces. And Rome becomes somewhat marginal, and it refers to Rome not as a city, but as a world. We use the term Byzantium, that's a modern term, but at the time they called it colloquially Romania, until it became the official name of the state by the 10th, 11th century. So treaties with foreign powers were between Romania and whoever they were making the treaty with. One distinctive feature of the East Roman Empire is that its capital is in Constantinople. This is a city that was founded by the Emperor Constantine, but it was also named New Rome. Like it was officially designated as a kind of branch office of Rome in the East and functioned that way, and was eventually given like all of the legal rights and status and perks of a Rome, like a Senate and various offices that are associated with Rome. The East Roman world kind of needed a capital, a focal point of its own in order to prevent it from like breaking apart, where they could, put their resources into it and have a shared agenda. Constantinople is kind of in between the Euphrates frontier and the Danube frontier, in a very strategic location on the waterways between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Constantinople is very quickly fortified with walls, and these walls are off the charts. It's like a triple line of defenses with a moat, a tall wall, and an even taller wall. Medieval cities come in 3 categories. There's unwalled cities, there's walled cities, and there's Constantinople. But after a certain point, especially in the 5th century, when the Mediterranean does begin to host some hostile powers like the Vandals in North Africa, then Constantinople really needs to develop a fleet. And the fleet then becomes a very important part of imperial defense, especially when they outfit it with flamethrowers. Greek fire is what we call it. They called it liquid fire. So it's some kind of napalm type mixture, which when ignited and propelled onto like an enemy ship, it would continue to burn even on the surface of the water. Like you couldn't get away from this. You couldn't swim away, you're swimming through the fire. So another very important thing to remember about the East Roman state, or Byzantium, is that it is what I would call a proper state. In other words, in its organization and the depth and penetration of state institutions on the local level, it has a centralized bureaucracy and state institutions for collecting taxes, recruiting soldiers, the judiciary, and so forth. Byzantium has a unified law of persons. Senators and soldiers and monks and bishops and farmers, they all have slightly different rights and responsibilities, but those are modifications of a core unified system of law. It can extract a reliable annual revenue. There are very, very few tax rebellions. And the same is true about the army, and this is very, very important. The army is recruited across the territories of the state and is used to defend the entirety of the state, depending on how the high command in Constantinople decide. There is no law of succession in Byzantium, as there wasn't in the Roman Empire. There's no rule of thumb that can tell you who the next emperor is going to be. Basically, emperors have to be judging their own popularity at every time. They have to be assessing whether there is a danger for some segment of society to put up another emperor. The greatest danger comes from the armies. They can use violence to put their own candidate on the throne. But here's some statistics. There's something like 91 emperors in the millennial history of Byzantium. Something like 41% of them come to power through some kind of violence. That is a very high ratio. So dynasties are arrangements of convenience by the political system. If an emperor is popular and there's no trouble and there's no uprisings, you're not losing foreign wars, you're not taxing too much, you can confidently expect that there are not going to be many challengers, or that if there are, the armies will side with you. But if you start faltering, if you're losing wars, if you're asking for more taxes, if there's some scandal or something like that, or you offend your subjects' religious sensibilities, then it's more likely that other people are going to start sounding out for support and looking for ways to depose you. And in that case, it doesn't really matter whether you have a son who is your heir, like a dynastic heir to the throne. You can both be deposed and killed or blinded or put in a monastery, depending on the period. The first Roman dynasty in history to reach the third generation was Constantine's, 3 centuries and more after the first emperor Augustus. And very many times, the political system will appoint an emperor who is a childless old man. This is a way of making sure that there isn't a dynasty. So the main responsibilities of the emperor are defending the state from foreign aggression, maintaining law and order, making sure that the justice system is fair, and also defending and upholding orthodoxy according to tradition or as they understand tradition. So the worst case scenario for an emperor is you're facing foreign wars, possibly 2 or 3 at a time. And now, because of all of this going on, you're not sure of the loyalty of the people of Constantinople. So suppose you're an emperor and there's some potential rival, and you just want to make sure that this person will never be able to challenge you effectively. One technique that the Byzantines used was to mutilate the body of that person you suspect or you don't want to come back to the throne. So that could be blinding, it could be cutting off their nose. It makes very visible on the face of the person that he's been rejected at some point, and it's a big ask, right, to get people to support you again if you want to make a bid for the throne. It's not impossible, however. So there was an emperor in the late 7th, early 8th century, Justinian II, who had his nose cut off, and yet who did return to power. According to one source, he had a golden prosthetic nose, and that's just one of those circumstances where enough people who wanted to support his return said, we can live with that. All things Byzantine are, in a way, a combination of Roman, Greek, and Christian things. And so when, let's say, you become emperor, you can choose which of your ancestors' names to use as your main name. So you just kind of accumulate names. If you've ever seen the Emperor Hadrian's full name, I think it's something like 27 names long. You have soldiers who are paid to do mostly part-time military service, especially when there's a campaign. And then you have some full-time mercenaries like you hire from abroad, and some imperial guards, highly paid professional soldiers, and they're also full-time. After the late 10th century, we also have the Varangian Guard. This is a unit of 6,000 Scandinavians, and these are very unique. They're sort of understood to be a very distinctive unit that is not even supposed to assimilate to Roman way of life very well, because they're supposed to be more loyal to the emperor than to the polity at large. It's an instrument of war, but it's also something that can be turned against them. So every time an army in the provinces tends to get bigger and more powerful, through economic growth and more recruitment, you find emperors splitting it up into smaller units and assigning it to more generals. And then in the 8th century, they create the central mobile forces, the Tarmada, which are kept in Constantinople or around Constantinople. And the emperor uses these both as sort of elite striking forces against foreign enemies, but also to use as a counterweight to the armies in the provinces that are under the control of the generals. There's no real nobility or aristocracy in this state, in the sense of this family is designated as being superior in social status and rank to everybody else and has all of these rights. They have power and influence and wealth to the degree that they can access state offices. But for the most part, emperors like to have a very high turnover in these positions. They don't want one person accumulating too much power unless it's someone they can absolutely trust. The aristocracy in Constantinople is wealthy and powerful because of its positions, not the reverse. So sometimes this has been called a meritocracy. Other scholars call it a pseudo-meritocracy. In practice, most of these people come from backgrounds of wealth and privilege, and they're very well connected. For the most part, not in all cases. So in the later Byzantine period, the emperors devised a different way in order to reward and pay their top officials or members of their family if they appointed them to important posts. And this was to bundle together a bunch of tax units and to assign the revenues of those tax units to those people. This is called a Pronoia system. So what happens is that we have a number of civil wars later on where they're fighting over who gets those allocations. From the emperor's point of view, the church is essentially another department of state. Emperors have a very strong say in who gets to be the patriarch. They can often veto candidates. The emperors tended to see themselves as the kinds of heads of the church. The clergy were obeying the laws and paying taxes and so forth. Since there is only one legal church in the East Roman state by law, in a sense, it is a very unifying presence in East Roman society. The armies march under the banners of the Virgin Mary or the saints, but at the same time, religion can also be a very divisive force in society. Emperors have to be very, very careful where they tread here. East Roman or Byzantine culture is, generally speaking, a combination of three cultural elements. It is Roman political power, law, and social organization, Christianity, especially in its Orthodox form, and Greek literature and language. So you mash those three things together and you get what we call Byzantium. The Byzantines are the ones who are preserving ancient Greek texts. They're the ones who have the New Testament in its original language, the church fathers and the church councils in the original language. And they're the ones who are living in a society that's governed by Roman law. Now, it's been translated from Latin into Greek, but it's still the same body of law. So they're very aware of these things, that if you're born in the Roman Empire, you're a Roman citizen, you are the heir to this very, very old and prestigious tradition. If you're its ruler, you consider yourself top dog in the world, like the most prestigious. You might not be the most powerful at any given moment. You're the heir to that very glorious legacy. This is a very, very old culture and very aware of it.